Alright, I am back with another build, and today we have probably one of my favourite new builds since patch 8 came out. This build is going to be dedicated to making our voice as deadly of a weapon as it can possibly be, using Vicious Mockery to its utmost optimization, as well as tying it into the lore of the Dark Urge in order to gain access to an extremely powerful final ability in the form of Power Word Kill, the most powerful our voice can get, being able to instantly kill anything under 100 HP. Now, the idea of this build basically being an evil dirge that uses their voice as a weapon feels really, really fun, but it does come with the caveat that in order to optimize Vicious Mockery, you do actually have to do some good things in order to get the best equipment to use with it. So, let me paint a picture of how this character is going to go. You're going to wake up on the Nautiloid with no memories, right? But I feel like in the previous life of the Dirge, before they lost their memories, they were maybe one who was able to use their powerful voice to be able to just kill people outright, right? Like using Power Word Kill, but so we're kind of putting a vicious twist, no pun intended, on Vicious Mockery, being able to use our voice to deal damage, control people's minds, you know, and basically use like light command words to be able to use different spell effects to control what our targets can and can't do. But of course, upon waking up in the Nautiloid, we don't remember any of this. We just know that we have this kind of silver tongue that is not only good in social situations, but can also actually deal damage using our words. And I think our Dirge character would actually find some influence in Astarion and Will here, where they're both highly charismatic, you know, kind of shit talkers. Let's be honest, Astarion more so than Will, but Will definitely has that panache and flair, especially in his opening cutscene. So maybe he decides to use this voice in more of a, you know, light-hearted way in order to be the leader of the party. And as such, Vicious Mockery being the kind of like flavorful taunts makes sense for this build. And then of course we work as a good guy, being influenced by the people around us, you know, saving the Druid Grove and all that to get access to the things that we need. But then when we hit Act 3 and we remember who we truly are, we give in to Bol's influence, either because we feel like we have no other choice, so it's more of a tragic thing, or we do just go full evil bastard. And I think that eventually leads us to killing Orin, accepting Bol's gift, and then getting Power Word Kill. And the Slayer form, I guess, but not really what I'm focusing on today. So overall, I think it creates an interesting kind of narrative thing where you end up kind of turning on your companions towards the end, but maybe at this point they're still really loyal to you, so it's kind of like this tragedy, like I say. And again, taking these specific steps throughout the playthrough is not only fun from a roleplay and lore perspective, but it does also give us the most powerful version of Vicious Mockery that we can get. Now, I will say this build does come with the caveat that while our obvious end goal is Power Word Kill, this is an ability that can only be used once per playthrough, which is why this build is called the final verse. Now, I know there is some, there's basically like a glitch that you can do with, Sorcerer's Twin Spell feature, where if you cast Power Word Kill on an enemy and yourself using Twin Spell, because you die during the casting, you don't actually lose the ability to use Power Word Kill, so you can use it multiple times, but I don't really want to exploit that. I like the idea of Power Word Kill being final, in the fact that when you finish this build, Power Word Kill is what you use to defeat the final boss of the game. Like, you get the Neverbrain to less than 100 HP, and you just end it with the final verse of your song. You've been a bard most of your playthrough, you've been singing and taunting and using your words in every way possible, and in the end, you just say, die, and the Neverbrain goes down. Again, it is the final verse. And I like the idea of this ability having this finality to it, I should say. Like, you use it just to end the game. I think that has a bit more narrative and roleplay weight than just exploiting it and using it a bunch of times, right? So and again, this build is more focused on using Vicious Mockery as well anyway, so I feel like having Power Word Kill be the icing on the cake in a sense feels better overall. So we're going to be focusing on that today, but without further ado, let's get into the build. We're going to kick things off as a rogue for multiple reasons. 1, more skill proficiencies, and 2, when we multiclass into Bard a bit later, that means because we multiclassed into Bard last, all of our items will use our Charisma modifier, which is going to be the highest. So, with Rogue, we're going to gain access to a few weapon and armor proficiencies. We mainly only need rapiers and short swords from here, because that is what we'll be using. Otherwise, though, we do get to mess with our ability scores here, and this is a pretty standard spread. Strength and intelligence are both at 8 because we don't need them, although I would say that the warped headband of intellect would feel pretty damn good on this build if you decide to go down that route. because, you know, you'd be able to do more intelligence-based stuff, and we're going to get so many skill proficiencies in this build that while we'll be decent at intelligence stuff by the time we're done, even with a base score of 8, you could get a lot more out of it if you so choose. So feel free to put that there if you want, but it's not required for this build. Dexterity is at 16 because this is going to affect our AC, which we really, really want to be high on this build, as well as our eventual sneak attack damage, because we will have the ability to still use weapons if we want for sneak attack. Constitution is at 14. Again, this is kind of a happy middle ground for someone who's not going to be a frontline fighter, and if this build is played correctly, your enemies aren't really going to be hitting you anyway, because Vicious Mockery imposes disadvantage on attack rolls, so with a high enough AC, you're basically never going to get hit in the first place. Wisdom is at 10. I would like this a bit higher, but we'll have a way of bumping up our mental saving throws later on into the build, so this is fine. And Charisma is at 17 because it's going to be our main spellcasting modifier for Vicious Mockery, and we're going to be bumping this up with a half feat later. Now, obviously here, if you're playing a Dark Urge, you're going to have the Haunted One background giving you access to Intimidation and Medicine. Because this is technically a Hireling and not a true Dark Urge, I don't have access to the Haunted One background, so I went with the, if you want to play as a Tav version of this build, you can take the Urchin background for Sleight of Hand and Stealth, so you don't have to get it later a different way. But we still want to take Intimidation here, so really the only thing you're missing from the, you know, the Dark Urge background is Medicine here, and you can still pick up Sleight of Hand and Stealth from our Rogue proficiencies anyway. You can just drop Insight and Perception because they're not 100% needed, so if you're playing the Tab version, use this skill proficiency spread, but otherwise if you're playing the Dark Urge version, you will need to pick up Sleight of Hand and Stealth through your Rogue proficiencies, dropping Insight and Perception, but that's ultimately fine. So, obviously, like I said, we're going to have Sleight of Hand and Stealth proficiency here, as well as Intimidation Expertise, because I do think that's going to be pretty important for this build, and Persuasion Expertise as well. We're going to leave Deception and Performance for now, because we're obviously going to be getting that a different way a bit later. And like I say, if you're playing the Tab version of this build, you could just pick up Insight and Perception as little bonuses, or you could grab Acrobatics or something like that. But I like the idea of having Insight and Perception personally, again, for that kind of social manipulation, being able to notice things. I could also see Investigation coming up, but otherwise, I feel like this is a solid starting spread. And again, if you're playing Dark Urge, you have to tweak it a bit slightly, but it's not a huge deal. Right, that's level 1. Right, immediately at level 2, we're going to take a quick multi-class dip into Bard to get our first Vicious Mockery, which is obviously our main weapon of the build. It's going to deal 1d4 psychic damage at base, and whenever we insult a creature, it will have disadvantage on its next attack roll, and it has to make a wisdom saving throw. We're going to be able to use this to synergize with multiple different pieces of equipment and abilities that we'll be getting later on, to basically make sure that Vicious Mockery always succeeds, as it is a wisdom save, and it's a save or suck, meaning that if they save, they don't take any damage. But again, by the time this build is done, that's never going to be a problem for us anymore, especially with some of the abilities that we're going to be getting later. But for now, it's a pretty decent damage type. Psychic damage is not often resisted in the early game, and of course it comes with the flavor of being able to literally taunt your foes with actual voice lines, which is always fun. We're also going to be grabbing Friends, because again, it's all about psychic and social manipulation. How could we not take it? And giving us advantage on charisma checks against non-hostile creatures is pretty damn good. Just be careful if you're in honor mode, because this can go wrong. Moving on to our spells, I think we have some pretty obvious choices here. First up is Dissonant Whispers. Basically, for our purposes here, unupgraded Vicious Mockery until we're able to make it a bit more powerful later on. This deals 3d6 psychic damage and allows us to potentially frighten a creature, meaning that they have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls and they cannot move. For now, at the cost of a spell slot, this is technically better than Vicious Mockery for us, but obviously it's not infinite like Vicious Mockery is, so you'll have to weigh the pros and cons of using each when it comes up, but for now, this is going to be a pretty solid kind of alternate version of what we're trying to do here. We're also going to grab some more spells that I think work well to be flavoured as using our voice. Obviously, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, we're going to tell a probably quite sinister joke, causing the creature to be wrapped in forceful laughter, knocking them prone, which obviously helps ourselves and our allies quite a bit. We're also going to go for Command Word Sleep, basically, is what I'm going to call this one, allowing us to say a quick word that causes an enemy to instantly fall asleep. And again, this isn't based on a saving throw, this is based on total hit points. So especially in the early game, if you can upcast this a little bit into the mid game as well, this is actually a very fun and useful spell, especially if you plan to use sneak attack and tangent with this, or again, your party members can take advantage of it. And for your final spell, it's entirely up to you what you want to grab here, but I do think Charm Person also does work in place of Friends, if you want to be able to do this sort of thing during combat as well, which I do think makes sense. It says enemies have advantage on the saving throw against being charmed, so it might not always work for you, but I do think it makes sense to have this. Otherwise, I would say Thunder Wave if you want to be able to use your voice in a more literal sense to create a booming wave that pushes enemies away from you. Animal Friendship can also work as kind of an alternative to Charm Person here if you want to be able to do it on beasts as well. And there's also Bane if you want a solid concentration spell that will allow you to impose disadvantage on saving throws, which of course can help with Vicious Mockery. You've got a lot of options available to you, so feel free to pick what you like. For your starting instrument, it's not going to matter what you pick, as we're going to be unequipping it and using our voice anyways. We also do get another skill proficiency at this point, and again we're going to avoid Deception and Performance for now because of a feat that we're going to be taking later, so you can pop this into something else if you like. I'm going to pop it into Medicine here just because that means we do still have the Haunted One background thing, so from here on out, the fact that we started with a different background than we should have if we're playing a Dark Urge doesn't matter. Otherwise, feel free to take something else. Now, we're going to go straight back to Rogue, because now that we have our Vicious Mockery as our action, we need to get the bonus action version. So, this is going to give us the ability to hide, dash, and disengage as a bonus action, dashing being extremely important for us here, and disengage as well, just so we can be able to back up and use Vicious Mockery from a safe distance if we need to. Now, Rogue level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and of course we're going to be going with Swashbuckler today. Swashbuckler is going to give us access to fancy footwork, meaning that once we make a melee attack against a target, that target cannot make opportunity attacks against us for the rest of our turn. Now, normally, this is quite good, but we're not really going to be focusing on using melee attacks as much with this build, which is why I think the bonus action Disengage can still work for us. But again, of course, we can stab someone with our weapon, run away, and then use Vicious Mockery as a bonus action, so, you know, you do get to play around with this. Again, I personally focused on using Vicious Mockery as much as I could, trying not to use the weapons where I could, but obviously doing that still works. We also gain access to Rakish Audacity, giving us a +2 bonus to initiative rolls, and this will scale with our rogue level. And as you no longer need advantage to trigger sneak attack on a target, as long as you're basically having a 1v1 on them, and you don't have disadvantage. Obviously, very powerful, quite like this feature. At Rogue level 4, this is where we get the fun stuff. Finally, we get access to the dirty tricks, including Vicious Mockery, allowing us to cast the cantrip as a bonus action, giving the target disadvantage on its next attack roll and giving us advantage on our next attack. Now, again, Vicious Mockery itself is not an attack roll, so we're not going to be getting too much benefit out of that unless we really need to get off a sneak attack. Otherwise, we now have access to our 2 Vicious Mockeries per turn. And again, that's going to get pretty stupid as we start going through this build a bit further. We're also going to gain access to our first feat of the build at this level, so total level 5, not too bad. And of course, we're going to be picking up the active feat, increasing our charisma by 1, rounding it out to an 18, and giving us expertise in deception and performance, which means we now have expertise in all the charisma skills, which is kinda damn good for level 5. Now, we don't actually need any more levels from Rogue. We can head over to Bard again and start working on getting even more of our Vicious Mockery kind of setup. So, we get Jack of all trades, adding half of our proficiency bonus to anything we're not proficient in, which is nice, as well as a 3rd short rest, which is always good, the typical level 2 Bard goodies. Now, at this point, you can kind of take whatever you like for your next spell. Speak with Animals is obviously great for roleplay, and I've made cases for everything else here, so really it is a pick your favourite type situation. I would say we don't have anything that we're majorly trying to concentrate on at the moment, so maybe Bane would be a good shout, pun not intended, but otherwise, feel free to pick whatever you like, it really doesn't matter. At Bard level 3, we do get to choose our subclass. And now I know what you guys are probably thinking at this point. Isn't this build extremely similar to the Astarion build that I made a while back? Yes, you are correct, but we're not going to be using College of Glamour today. We're heading over to College of Law. College of Law is going to give us access to cutting words, allowing us to impose a disadvantage using our Bardic Inspiration. Not disadvantage in the usual sense, but you know what I mean. We get to invoke a penalty, that's the better way of putting it, to our foes based on our Bardic Inspiration die, basically doing the inverse of normal Bardic Inspiration. We can cut their attack rolls and their saving throws. So the reason why cutting words works so well on this build is because if we cast Vicious Mockery and someone succeeds the save, we can use cutting words to taunt them again, possibly making them fail the save, meaning that Vicious Mockery has a way higher chance of going up. And by going to higher levels in Bard, we could basically get 5 Bardic Inspiration per short rest, 4 or 5, which means that we can do this pretty much consistently, meaning that Vicious Mockery will always go off. Also, same as Vicious Mockery, this does use voice lines for the taunt, so you're literally just berating your opponent with insults until they break down and die. That sounds pretty dirge if you ask me. We're also going to gain access to level 2 spells at this point, and I love the idea of using Phantasmal Force on this build. Basically, using our concentration on an intelligence saving throw, which is pretty good, we get to deal an additional 1d6 of psychic damage. But because as long as we maintain concentration on this spell, each subsequent turn will continue applying damage, we're literally infecting someone's mind, causing them to repeatedly listen to our words every turn, taking more and more damage. I think that sounds pretty flavorful and thematic for this build, which is why I want to use it here. We're also going to gain access to even more skill proficiencies and expertise. We're going to gain 3 more skill proficiencies, and at this point, you can take whatever you like. I quite like grabbing Arcana, Investigation, and, well, I mean, again, the last one's kind of up to you. I think Acrobatics is good for not being shoved, and I would honestly put your expertise into Sleight of Hand and Stealth, because we're going to have those scores pretty damn high, and we're going to actually have advantage on dexterity checks with this build, so having these 2 as expertise is going to feel very, very nice. You can replace a spell at this level if you want to, but we don't really need to. At Bard level 4, you're going to get another cantrip, and I think Mage Hand is pretty good. We're also going to gain access to another level 2 spell, and I really like Hold Person or Crown of Madness here. Crown of Madness allows us to infect our enemy's mind with words of, confusion and deceit, causing them to go mad. Or we can use basically what I would call another Command Word Light, like Command Word Freeze, and they just have to stay in place. They can't move. And obviously making it so that all hits from within 3 meters are critical hits. That's great for our sneak attacks as well as the rest of the party. So I think Hold Person has slightly more value, but we can absolutely grab Crown of Madness in a minute as well, especially if you want to replace an earlier level spell that you think you're not really using too much. I would actually say that you could probably ditch Charm Person at this point and go for Crown of Madness instead. We're also going to get our second feat of the build here, and I think maxing out our Charisma is the best thing to do, as again, this just gets our Vicious Mockery to its highest power level possible, as quickly as possible. At Bard level 5, we're going to gain access to improved Bardic Inspiration, increasing our Bardic Inspiration to a D8, which means now we can inflict a D8 penalty on our cutting words, which feels very useful. Also, our Bardic Inspiration now comes back on a short rest, which feels very, very good in practice. We also gain access to level 3 spells at this point, and I think that Fear makes so much sense here. Again, our voice is so deadly and so all-consuming and so powerful that we can just say a word and everyone flees in terror. Targets will drop their weapons and become fearful, and they will have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, similar to before. So, and they have to run away so that they can make it so that they can't see us, so they can try and shake off the fear. So honestly, I think this is a pretty fun thing to have. Feels like it fits the build quite well, but I also think something like Bestow, Curse, and Hypnotic Pattern could kind of achieve a similar effect, so feel free to play around with this choice. Now, at Bard level 6, we're going to gain access to magical secrets because we are a Lore Bard. We do get to choose another Bard spell up to level 3, and at this point, take whatever you like. We kind of have everything that I think is good for this build. Hypnotic Pattern, obviously, is another good option, I think, here. A lot of people say this spell sucks, but personally, I don't really think so. I quite like this one overall. And the fact that it can also be cast while silenced does give it that little bit of a niche for a control spell in a pinch if you need that. But otherwise, you do have access to other things like Enthrall, which feels like it makes sense for this build, but isn't the most powerful spell in the world. There's Speak with Dead if you want even more dialogue options. There's obviously Bestow Curse, which I did make a case for if you want to really focus down one enemy and debilitate them specifically. You've got a lot of options available to you. There's also Glyph of Warding, which is always a fun choice as well, but I don't think fits the build as well. And Enhanced Ability, giving you advantage on certain ability checks, could also be really useful. So honestly, it's a pick your poison type situation. Most things will work here, so really, again, pick your favorites. I would probably just go with Hypnotic Pattern in this case, but you can choose something else. Now, for our magical secrets, there are 2 spells that immediately jumped out to me that 3 spells, I should say, that immediately jumped out to me. The first one, which we are going to be taking for this build, is Command. I mean, come on, how could I not take this on this build? This allows us to command a creature using only our words to flee, move closer, freeze, drop their weapon, or drop to the ground. This is an incredibly potent spell that is useful in so many different situations, but I feel like if I didn't include it on this build somehow, then I would have failed, because it just makes too much sense to have on this build, and the fact that Lorebard gives it to us without any need for mods or multiclassing or such like that just feels way too good. So, what about the second spell? Well, two immediately jump to mind. The first one, which I consider overall to be the slightly weaker option, is Hellish Rebuke. It's literally, a rebuke. It's you using your words, pointing at someone that you can see who just attacked you and going, "No, you," and then hitting them with a bit of fire damage, giving us another element to work with. And overall, I do think this makes sense, but I don't think it is the most powerful option. I think the most powerful option for this build is Counterspell, because again, we can flavor this as literally just using like another sort of command word light to be able to just say, no, that spell doesn't exist. Like your opponent's casting a spell and you just say, no, and then the spell just stops. That feels pretty goddamn cool, which is why I recommend it for this build. Otherwise, feel free to take something else, but I think out of these three, you definitely want to kind of pick one of the ones I suggested if you want to fit on the theme of the build. Now, I'm going to take a moment here to say that there is technically another way you can make this build, but in my opinion, just doesn't feel as right. It's good, but it does what we're trying to do in a different way. You technically don't need to take Bard levels at all in this build. You can go Warlock instead, picking up Pact of the Tome, in which case, Hexblade Warlock is going to feel pretty good if you want to lean into like big, high-powered sneak attacks in between your Vicious Mockeries. As well as, at this stage in the game, if you want to take 2 levels of Hexblade, that would do a lot for you. Charisma-based attacks, Hexblade's Curse, you have a lot to work with there, so if you want to take 2 levels of Hexblade from this point on, you could. But I instead want to go to level 8 of Bard, because that's going to give us an extra usage of Bardic Inspiration, which means an extra usage of Cutting Words, which helps with Vicious Mockery, as well as giving us higher scaling spell slots and access to level 4 spells. Now, I'll be the first to admit, the level 4 spell options here, they're not the most enticing for what we're trying to do here, but I do think Confusion is a pretty powerful option, allowing us to confuse a group of creatures, meaning that they'll just basically do random stuff, maybe even attack their allies, which feels kind of cool, again, and it feels very much coded for what we're trying to do here. But I also recommend that we have greater invisibility, allowing us to turn invisible. Attacks against us will have a disadvantage and we attack with advantage, and we can keep up the invisibility as long as we continue to succeed stealth checks. Here's the thing though, as I said, we have expertise in stealth and we're going to have advantage on all dexterity checks pretty much permanently by the time this build is done. So you will basically always be able to maintain greater invisibility, just being able to throw out Vicious Mockeries from nowhere, which feels very strong in practice. So, greater invisibility is perfect for this build. At level 8 of Bard, I'm going to pick up Confusion, because I already made a case for it, but feel free to choose something else. As well as we do get an extra feat, which allows us to bump up our dexterity even more, giving us even better AC and dexterity checks. Now, like I said, the 1 or 2 level dip of Hexblade does make sense at this stage of the build if you want to go for a more martial mix with the sneak attacks and such like that, but I think for the Vicious Mockery focused build that is meant to use our voice above all else and be a bit more of a spellcaster, this is the best way to do it. Getting this higher dexterity for those stealth checks on greater in this for the late game, as well as that higher AC with the disadvantage we'll be imposing on Vicious Mockery, this just feels so much better. Technically, you could also go with Defensive Duelist, allowing you to potentially use a reaction to add your proficiency bonus to your armor class, but I tend to find Defensive Duelist doesn't proc nearly as much as I would like, and I think the overall defensive increase just feels better, so we're going to go with that instead. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a pretty damn powerful setup. You're going to have access to pretty much the most powerful version of Vicious Mockery possible, getting high damage off of it immediately and being able to basically guarantee that it always goes off thanks to Cutting Words and other things that I'll be getting into in a minute. You get 2 of them per turn, one as an action, one as a bonus action, basically giving you 2 chances to apply that debuff and doing damage. And again, being able to apply disadvantage to attack rolls is not just good for you with our high AC, but for everyone in the party who doesn't want to be taking that damage. We also have a ton of battlefield controlling utility options. We are one of the most effective bard rogues ever, having expertise in a ton of things, all of the social stats and sleight of hand and expertise and sleight of hand and stealth, plus having advantage on those checks. Again, I'll get to that in a minute, but also the ability to maneuver around the battlefield, buff our allies with bardic inspiration if we need to, be able to do continuous damage, hold person, crown of madness, sleep, Tasha's, command, we have counterspell. Like, we are just such a versatile character that has a really powerful base skill set, being able to use 2 Vicious Mockeries, but then also being able to do all of this other stuff on top of being able to still use Vicious Mockery with our bonus action after the fact without something like the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel. Because up until now, if you wanted to use a bonus action Vicious Mockery, you had to use that Act 3 ring, whereas now we can get it as early as level 4, which I think is just awesome. I think it's great, you know, for early game builds who want to take advantage of this. And in fact, speaking of, this build's progression feels great. You get the core of the playstyle, which is 2 Vicious Mockeries, as early as level 5. And up until then, you're playing a bard with a rogue. You're playing a rogue with a bard dip, which just feels great anyway. You get again, you get all those benefits from having a ton of great social stats right off the bat. And again, you basically play a straight rogue, then a straight bard. The progression feels very natural. And again, it's all going to tie into this idea of eventually being this tragic character of somewhat of a redemption dirge that is forced to turn towards the end and ends up getting power word kill to use on the final boss. Like, again, imagine this playthrough and you get to end on that after using your voice as your main weapon for the whole game. Like, come on, how cool does that sound? Or if not, frickin' the Neverbrain, use it on Raphael, who is also using his voice to sing at you for the whole fight, and then the final verse is you saying, "and it's over," boom, and then he dies. Like, come on, you cannot deny how cool that's going to be. But anyways, enough about that. Let's talk about the equipment, because obviously it is one of the most important parts of this build. Now, as you can see, we have no weapons. Obviously, this is because I mainly wanted to focus on the aspect of using our voice, but we can actually get a decent weapon for this build through the Shadowblade ring. Now, again, very similar to my Astarion build that I made a few weeks ago, but Shadowblade just felt like it made the most sense for this build. However, I will go over some alternatives in a second. The Shadowblade is a pure psychic damage blade, which makes me think that we're literally turning the power into our voice to speak a Vicious Mockery weapon into existence, a pure psychic damage blade that has advantage on attack rolls against slightly or heavily obscured creatures. But the fact that it's pure psychic damage can get over a lot of resistances. Just don't try to fight a Steel Watcher with it, because they're immune to psychic damage, and that means all of our stuff would do absolutely nothing. But of course, with Shadowblade, you're going to have access to like this really powerful psychic weapon, as I said. And again, the fact that it's kind of magic coded and feels like we're literally manifesting our voice into a weapon just felt like it was the most right for this build. But because we have to get it through the ring, this means we won't get it until mid-Act 2. It's also one of the things that prevents us from being an evil dirge throughout the whole playthrough, as you do need to save the Druid Grove in order to get access to this ring. If you don't want to use this, we obviously have other options, but realistically, I feel like this is pretty much the best option for what we're going to be trying to do with this build. Again, the focus is Vicious Mockery, but if you still want to make use of those sneak attacks, well, you've certainly got an option. But in the early game, you can use the Sword of Screams, which is a rapier that comes with an extra 1d4 of psychic damage. And, again, if you're playing this semi-redemption route, you can go for the Infernal Rapier from Will's Quest, giving you a +1 bonus to spell save DC, which helps with Vicious Mockery, and this uses your spellcasting ability modifier for the attack and damage rolls, meaning that we don't actually need to get our hands on a Hexblade if we want to use our Charisma for our attacks. So, obviously, this is a pretty solid choice. It does mean we have to have Will with us, though, and again, if we attack the Druid Grove, Will leaves, so we would need Will in our party to get this. Again, you don't have to play this as like in the way that I said. You could just go pure evil. You would just be missing out on some of the equipment that I think is pretty damn important to this build. Anyways, that is kind of the main weapon set. No ranged weapon here, but obviously the usuals work, so feel free to just pick whatever you like there. Moving on to our head equipment, we have the Circlet of Psionic Revenge. This is kind of like my way of kind of getting Hellish Rebuke into this build without actually having Hellish Rebuke, because whenever we succeed a saving throw, the foe that caused that throw, that's a hard thing to say, takes 1d4 psychic damage. So basically, it's like someone tried to use something on us, no you, and we just immediately hit them for like a base level Vicious Mockery. It's more of a flavor thing than anything. You can use the Circlet of Mental Anguish so that whenever someone fails a roll against fails their saving throw against our Vicious Mockery, we gain a d4 of hit points, so we actually have a pretty substantial source of healing on this build, as well as the Diadem of Arcane Synergy. Again, if you want to lean into the Sneak Attack Martial Synergy, by casting Vicious Mockery, we would gain Arcane Synergy because it inflicts a condition, allowing us to add our spellcasting ability modifier to our attacks. Also, again, if you want to lean more into the roleplay side of things and have a higher intelligence, the Warped Headband of Intellect also works. So you've got a ton of options for your headpiece here, all of which are phenomenal on this build, so pick your favourites. Moving on to the cloak, obviously we have to have the Deathstalker Mantle. We are a Dirge, this thing is just amazing. We're already playing into invisibility with this build using things like greater invisibility in the late game, but we could say that is an evolution of what this cloak allows us to do in the early game, allowing us to become invisible after killing someone. So again, we get to basically get out of dodge for free after talking someone to death. Moving on to our cloak, obviously the Potent Robe, which is one of the most important things on this build by far, as it adds our Charisma modifier to our cantrips, and that includes both Vicious Mockeries, even the one from Swashbuckler, making this deal a plus 10 damage per turn if we get both Vicious Mockeries off, 5 per Vicious Mockery, which is obviously very goddamn strong. Technically, you could make it a plus 6 if you throw the Birthright hat on this build as well, another option, bumping us up to 22 Charisma, meaning that this can get pretty stupid pretty fast, as well as giving us temporary hit points each turn equal to our Charisma modifier. So say we combine this with the Circlet of Mental Anguish, basically recovering 2d4 per turn, plus getting 5 or 6 temporary hit, or 5 temporary hit points per turn as well. You're going to be surprisingly tanky, because again, you're going to have a decent AC, you'll have around 18 AC with Mage Armour, which I'll talk about in a minute, as well as being able to impose disadvantage on all attack rolls against you, plus the healing, plus the temporary hit points. I'm just saying. Now, again, now that we're here, I will point this out though. We have an AC of 15, which is not the high AC I was talking about. You are going to be using Mage Armour on this build, but it is going to come from someone other than you. This person just needs to be someone who can cast Mage Armour. They don't even need to be in your party. As long as they cast Mage Armour on you, they can be left at camp and you will keep the benefits of Mage Armour. I usually like to have my builds be completely self-sustaining if I can, unless it's specifically made to be a duo build, but otherwise, having a character in your party that can cast Mage Armour on you will bump you up to a total AC of 18. Not the highest, but you have the opportunity to bump it higher if you would like, and with that you would, but again, that doesn't really matter so much because we're always going to have disadvantage against us in some shape or form thanks to Vicious Mockery, and it's not going to matter. You could have 15 AC might even be enough, but 18 AC just really does make those attacks never hit you. So really, in reality, just have someone in your party cast Mage Armour and you'll be absolutely fine. Right, that was kind of a weird sentence, but moving on. Next up, another cornerstone of this build for 2 pieces of equipment that inflict mental fatigue, Brain Drain Gloves and the Ring of Mental Inhibition. So, the Brain Drain Gloves can be obtained towards the end of Act 2. Whenever you deal psychic damage, Vicious Mockery or Shadowblade, you're going to inflict mental fatigue, meaning that the affected target will have a stacking penalty of -1 to their mental saving throws, Wisdom being one of them, meaning that for every Vicious Mockery that we get, more Vicious Mockeries later on will have a higher chance of succeeding. And if they fail one of those saving throws, again while having 5 or more turns of this condition, they take an extra 1d4 of psychic damage. But of course, we can just continuously cycle this around because they lose the charges, but then we just immediately gain them back with the next Vicious Mockery. So this allows us to spread a pretty debilitating debuff across any enemies that we choose to use Vicious Mockery on, whether we focus on one target or focus on multiple, lowering their saving throw chances and making it so it's even harder for them to succeed because we can apply 2 stacks of this per turn thanks to Vicious Mockery. It's basically the best piece of equipment for this build, as it just provides such a massive debuff. Combining this with the Ring of Mental Inhibition, making it so that whenever a foe fails a saving throw against one of our spells or actions, they gain it for 2 turns, we can just basically stack, or in fact, yeah, we can stack up to 4 turns of mental fatigue every turn, meaning that they have a -4 penalty to our next Vicious Mockery and take that extra psychic damage. It's just more free damage and a higher chance to hit. Between the ring and the gloves, maybe it's a bit overkill, but honestly, you feel how efficient it really is. Combining this with the Boots of Stormy Clamor that allow us to, whenever we inflict a condition upon a hostile creature, they also inflict 2 turns of Reverberation. Well, this gets pretty stupid, because Reverberation does the same thing as Mental Fatigue, but for physical saving throws, and instead deals thunder damage and can possibly knock the target prone as well. So we now kind of not only deal psychic damage, but thunder damage with our voice, which feels very appropriate, and yeah. we can impose disadvantage, like not a penalty, on all saving throws that an enemy could possibly do, while also weaving in extra damage. That is maybe one of the best debuffing support movesets I've ever seen in this game. Like, being able to impose like upwards of a -4 penalty to all saving throws for an enemy is just stupid. And again, we can combine this with the ability for self-heals and all this other stuff to just be an absolute menace in combat. This is one of the most potent combinations I've seen that still feels thematic and appropriate and like it all blends together in a way that makes sense. This is why this is one of my new favorite builds. I absolutely love this. We're going to be combining this with the Fey Semblance Amulet, giving us advantage on all mental saving throws ourselves. We're so good at manipulating others that we don't really get manipulated ourselves. But of course, the elephant in the room. You guys have all seen it on my inventory slot here, the Resonance Stone. So for those of you that don't know what the Resonance Stone is, it's an item that can be obtained around the same time you'll get the Brain Drain Gloves. By the way, Braces of Defense in the other game for a bit of extra armor class. But the Resonance Stone inflicts a condition to all nearby creatures, including yourself, called Steeped in Bliss. Steeped in Bliss will make it so that you have advantage on every physical check that you do. So that's Constitution checks, not saving throws, so Concentration's not really affected by this. Made that mistake in the past. But it does give you advantage on those Stealth and Sleight of Hand checks from Dexterity, like I said before, and technically advantage on Athletics as well, but we're not really worried about that. However, it comes with the caveat of giving yourself and everyone around you disadvantage on mental saving throws. For us, that's not so much of a problem, because with the Fey Semblance Amulet, we just turn that into a neutral. It's not negative or positive for us, so we only gain the benefits here. But of course, all surrounding targets now having disadvantage on their mental saving throws, that being Wisdom, Intelligence, and Charisma, Vicious Mockery is now guaranteed. You're applying upwards of a -4 penalty, plus giving them disadvantage on their saving throw against it. It's guaranteed. Vicious Mockery is guaranteed to go off now. And not only that, it does double damage because you apply vulnerability to psychic damage. This is how we're getting that upwards of 50 damage on Vicious Mockery. Because this is just stupid. Like, again, this is 3d4 doubled plus 10, plus 5 per cast doubled. So this is upwards of 20 extra damage guaranteed per Vicious Mockery, plus whatever you roll on the damage die. Like, between your two Vicious Mockeries, like, I can't even begin, and the fact that they're guaranteed to go off because of all these debuffs that you're applying, and you get the ability to do this from stealth, using advantage on stealth checks from greater invisibility, like, holy Moses. What gets scarier than just being assaulted in your mind from a force you can't even see, to the point where your mind just collapses in on itself through the sheer words alone? This is about as evil as Dirge gets in a weird way. So yeah, the Resonance Stone, kind of important for this one. I think it does, well, I do think it is somewhat overkill in a way, and is not actually recommended. It does just give such a massive boost of power to this build that you can't really deny its efficiency. It is insane how good this is. So yeah, overall, I think the Resonance Stone just tips this build over the edge into being my pretty much one of my new favorite builds of all time. Like, honestly, the combination of the fact that we get to use Vicious Mockery twice per turn and use it to do so many different things beyond what it's normally capable of is amazing. The only big caveat that we have here is, yes, we are also vulnerable to psychic damage, which could be a problem. I could see someone playing a Githyanki, perhaps using some sort of Githyanki equipment or ability to gain resistance to psychic damage, or making the elixirs a psychic resistance to negate this and just make it neutral damage, in which case you can also offset that penalty as well, but that will be a bit trickier to manage overall. But yeah, that is the build. For the camp clothing, we're just using the comfortable Ash Meadow outfit and the regular tasteful boots, coloured in the red fighter dye from P4's dye mod, to give us this kind of greyish black and red look, which I felt fit the build. But honestly, it's really up to you, whatever you want to use here. I would recommend a camp clothing mod personally to give yourself a nice look. But yeah, that is the build. And what else can I say? This might be, like I said, my favourite build so far. Dancer will always have a proper place in my heart, like I said, but honestly, I just love Vicious Mockery as a spell, as a cantrip, and the fact that this just pushes it so far while still being an extremely fun build feels amazing. And again, the roleplay opportunities will come up from this by playing this Redemption Dirge who's taking the best of their allies and then eventually twisting it in the end. And again, power word kill being the final thing that you use after all is said and done just feels great. I would have gone to the extra time to actually set up that encounter, but unfortunately it would have just taken too much time and I would not have gotten this video out on time. But I will let you guys play through the game with this build and explore that for yourself, because I think it could just be one of the most fun things you could do with this game, just ending it off on the most powerful spell that your voice can cast. But is it really? Because at this point, is Power Word Kill the strongest? Or has our Vicious Mockery actually surpassed it? I'll let you decide. Right, that's going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.